And to other stories now, the Supreme Court has affirmed the election of 7 governors in a unanimous judgment of a 7-man panel led by Justice Mary Peter Odili. They are the governors of Oyo, Ogun, Kaduna, Akwa Ibom, Nasarawa, Katsina and Lagos states. The court upheld the elections after listening to separate appeals regarding the outcomes of the 2019 elections. Our correspondent Amaka Okafo reports.
It was a winning streak for 8 governors at the Supreme Court as the Apex Court upheld their elections, dismissing all the appeals challenging their elections. The Supreme Court affirmed the election victory of Mr. Seyi Makinde of the People's Democratic Party as the Oyo State Governor. In a unanimous judgment, the Apex Court found merit in the appeal filed by Mr. Makinde that the majority judgment of the appeal court was a miscarriage of justice. The appeal court had earlier ruled against the Oyo Electoral Tribunal, which dismissed the petition by the All Progressive Congress and its candidate, Mr. Adebayo Adelabu. In the case of Kaduna State governorship election, Mr. Isa Ashiru, the candidate of the People's Democratic Party, had approached the Supreme Court challenging the election victory of Mr. Nasir El-Rufai. However, in a unanimous judgment delivered by Justice Santos Mweze, the appeal filed by Mr. Ashiru was dismissed for lacking in merit. It was also victory for Mr. Abdullahi Saleh as the Supreme Court upheld his election as governor of Nasarawa State. A 7-man panel of the Apex Court, led by Justice Mary Peter Odili, dismissed the appeal filed by Mr. David Mbugadu and the PDP to challenge Mr. Saleh's victory at the March 9, 2019 governorship election. The court held that the appellant failed to prove allegations of substantial non-compliance in the election. In the case of Katsina State, Justice Iyan Gokoro held that the appellant, Senator Garba Lado of the PDP, did not prove beyond a reasonable doubt that Governor Bello Masari did not qualify to participate in the election.
You heard the emphatic pronouncement of the Supreme Court to the effect that Governor Masari Aminu Bello Masari is eminently educationally qualified to be governor of Katsina State. And all the hues and cries amount to a mere molehill.
My client is bound by it. Every one of us are bound by it. So that is the judgment.
Similarly, the Supreme Court sealed the re-election of Mr. Udom Emmanuel of the PDP as the governor of Akwa Ibom State. In his ruling, Justice Tijo Muhammad held that the appeal by Mr. Nsime Ekere of the All Progressive Congress lacked merit and is dismissed.
This was our contention, that the appellants had brought nothing to the Supreme Court, and I am happy that the Supreme Court upheld it.
The Supreme Court also affirmed the election of Governor Dapo Abiodun of Ogun State on the grounds that the appellant, Mr. Adekunle Akinlade of the Allied People's Movement, did not prove the allegation of substantial non-compliance and irregularities in the election. The Supreme Court concluded the day's proceedings by upholding the election of Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu of Lagos State. The unanimous judgment was delivered by Justice Paul Galinje, who held that the reliefs sought by the appellant did not fall within the ambit of Section 138 of the Electoral Act. With these judgments, the Apex Court has brought to an end controversies surrounding any of these elections. Amaka Okafo, Channels Television News.
So 8 states, how could I possibly forget Ebonyi State? So we have the states Oyo, Ogun, Kaduna, Akwa Ibom, Nasarawa, Katsina, Lagos, and of course Ebonyi State. For more perspectives on the harvest of victories by the 8 sitting governors at the Supreme Court, we have a guest joining us from our Abuja studio. Dr. Hamisu Abdurrahman is a political analyst. We'd like to thank you for joining us on the program. Now, we've heard from the final court on the election cases, for more of the states just yesterday. What impact would you say this announcement has in relation to governance in those states?
Well, thank you very much. I would say the Nigerian elite are used to going to court and juggling governance, but the impact is simply overwhelming. When you have to think about what you need to do and then pending cases in the court, that usually slow the pace of development and the kind of impact the governor must have been able to make after taking over from office. That is one side of the equation. The other side of the equation is the resources with which the governors usually prosecute their cases in the court. Nobody is able to establish where the humongous amount of money that is involved in litigations, especially with the revelations coming after the 2015 election, where the judiciary was targeted by the government in an act that tried to expose a collaboration between the senior advocates of Nigerians that usually represent these governors in court, the amount of money they charge, and then the implication of that on the pulse of the state. Up to this moment, nobody is able to establish where they get, for instance, $2 billion to prosecute the cases in Supreme Court and other courts all over the land. So there are two implications. One is the resources that is used to prosecute the case. The second impact is the inability of these governors to be able to roll out their development plan or strategies before pronouncements in the court are made, because of they don't know how the outcome will be.
Indeed, some Nigerians have argued that a lot of the cases, it seems like there's a hold on the dividends of democracy while the governors await the final judgment for the Supreme Court. But when you look at, this current system, is it the best for us getting judgment many months after the declaration from an election? And what do you think should happen moving forward?
You see, let me say, though this is not the best option, we were thinking that elections and the outcome ought to be decided with the end of the polling and the counting of the ballot on the election day. But what we've witnessed over time in Nigeria is litigation. And that has been encouraged by the inability of those that feel cheated to even prove their case in the court of law. The formula Nigerian elites that are used to contesting elections use is that you should rig and be taken to the court rather than to go to the court yourself. So you could see that from the analysis of the cases, none of them were able to prove beyond reasonable doubt, because the evidences you needed to prove beyond reasonable doubt are always dissolving as the day goes by, because most of the arrangements are ad hoc, from the party to the agent to collation of evidence. So you can never prove your case beyond reasonable doubt in the court of law in Nigeria. And that has encouraged the parties as well as candidates to really use any means available, especially violence, to rig election, and then you go to court, and then the court will say you are not able to prove your elections, your allegation beyond reasonable doubt. The Nigerian system, the electoral system itself, does not assist a candidate to really collate the evidences that are needed to prove cases beyond reasonable doubt.
All right. We'd like to thank you at this time. Dr. Hamisu Abdurrahman, thank you for talking to us at this time.